Welcome to Rain Narrator channel where we take you on a journey of deep relaxation and complete tranquility with the sound of raindrops adding an atmosphere of tranquility and comfort. Relax, enjoy, and prepare to enter the world of dreams. If you are looking for an ideal way to relax or calm your mind before sleep, you are in the right place. Follow us to get the best stories. I never imagined that the story of my life would be one of betrayal. But that's the journey I've been on. Looking back now, I still can't believe how it all happened. I grew up in a family where tradition was everything. My parents, both pillars of the community, had always told me that love would come after marriage. So when they arranged for me to marry Nia, the girl from the neighboring town, I thought little of it. In fact, I had no expectations at all. I was young, naive, and all I wanted was to please my parents. We met only a few times before the wedding. I remember her face, sweet and reserved, with dark eyes that seemed full of untold stories. But to me, she was just another face, someone I would grow to love, or so I thought. The day of the wedding came and went in a blur. It felt like a formality more than a celebration. There was no wild passion, no fireworks in the sky, no heart-racing excitement, just a quiet ceremony and then a life that I assumed would follow in its predictable, orderly way. We moved into our new home. At first, it wasn't so bad. Nia was kind. She was gentle, attentive, always doing what was expected of her, just as I did my duty as a husband. We had no grand love story, but that didn't matter. I thought love would come over time, that it would grow like a plant, steady and true. But as the months passed, I began to sense a change. Nia was no longer the girl I had met in the brief moments before our wedding. Her smile, once soft and uncertain, had hardened into something distant. She seemed withdrawn, as if she were somewhere else, looking beyond me. I chalked it up to the stress of adjusting to married life. But there were moments that unsettled me. One night I returned home from a long day of work, expecting to find her preparing dinner. But instead I found her sitting by the window, staring out at the fading sunlight. She didn't even turn when I walked in. "Nia?" I asked, my voice tentative. She looked at me, her eyes empty, and then slowly looked away. "I'm fine," she said, her voice flat. But I wasn't convinced. Weeks turned into months, and I continued to notice more of her behavior, her absences, the quiet, the distance growing between us like a chasm I couldn't cross. I tried to speak to her, to get her to open up, but she remained closed off, like a door that was bolted shut. I began to feel like I was losing her, but I couldn't understand why. Then one day, everything changed. I came home early from work, and as I entered the house, I heard voices I didn't recognize. I froze in the hallway, straining to hear. There was laughter, but it wasn't her laugh. It was deep, rich, and full of warmth. It came from the living room. Slowly, I crept toward the door, not wanting to intrude, but curiosity gnawed at me. When I peeked around the corner, my heart sank. There on our couch sat Nia, laughing at something the man next to her had said. His face was familiar, but not in the way a friend's face should be. It was a man I had seen a few times in passing, someone who seemed to always be around the same circles she had begun to frequent. I didn't know why, but seeing her like that, happy, at ease, in a way I hadn't seen her since our wedding, felt like a slap in the face. They didn't notice me at first, but when they did, the smile on Nia's face faltered. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw guilt in them. "James," she started, but I could tell the words were rehearsed, prepared. I wanted to hear her explain, to tell me that it wasn't what it looked like, but I didn't have the strength. Instead, I turned and left. I didn't ask her about it the next day or the next. What was there to say? The truth was right in front of me. The love I had thought we would build together was fading, replaced by something else, something unspoken and painful. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself waiting for her to come clean, to admit what was happening. But Nia never did. She never apologized or explained. Instead, she kept growing more distant, and the man I had seen her with appeared more frequently. I realized then that the betrayal wasn't just in her actions, it was in the silence. It was in her refusal to acknowledge the truth. She was in love with him. It was as if she had made a decision without me, without a second thought. I confronted her one night, the weight of all those unspoken words finally spilling out. "Nia, what's going on?" I asked, my voice shaking with emotion. She looked at me for a long moment, as if trying to find the right words, but then simply said, "I've fallen in love with him." The finality of her words cut deeper than anything I could have imagined. The betrayal wasn't just in her love for someone else. It was in her abandonment of everything. We had promised. Everything we were supposed to be. I was nothing to her now. Just a stranger who she had once called her husband. There was no fight, no argument, no explanation. Just the cold, painful truth. She had fallen for someone else, and in doing so, she had left me behind. For months I stayed in that house. In that life that felt like a ghost of what it could have been. I watched as she drifted further away. As the man she loved came and went. And I was left to pick up the pieces of a life that had once been mine. I tried to move on, but it wasn't easy. There were nights when I would lie awake, wondering what I had done wrong, where I had gone wrong. But in the end, it wasn't about me. It was about her. She chose him. I tried to understand, to forgive, but some things are too broken to fix. The love we had, if it was ever real, was shattered beyond repair. In the end, I had to let go. I had to accept the truth. Nia had fallen in love with someone else, and I was nothing more than a memory she had outgrown, and so I walked away. It wasn't a dramatic exit or a fiery confrontation. It was just walking away from the life I thought I knew. Now, years later, I look back on it all, the marriage, the dreams, the broken promises, and I wonder what would have happened if I had known the truth earlier. But maybe it wouldn't have mattered. Maybe the ending was always meant to be this way. I was just an ordinary guy trying to figure out what I wanted from life. Nothing ever seemed to happen for me. No great adventures, no grand loves. That is, until I met her. Her name was Lily, and she had a way about her that was unlike anyone I'd ever known. She had this aura, this mystery, that made it impossible not to be drawn to her. I noticed her first in the coffee shop near my apartment. She was sitting in the corner, sipping her tea, her eyes focused on a book. But there was a quiet sadness in her expression that made my heart ache. I didn't know her, but I wanted to. I needed to. We began to talk casually. At first it was just small talk, about the weather, about the books she read, and sometimes the music that played in the cafe. I wasn't used to someone like her taking an interest in me, and I found myself getting lost in her presence. But there was always something off about her. She never seemed to want to talk about herself. If I asked too many questions, she'd smile and change the subject, always with that soft, enigmatic laugh that made me feel like I was missing something crucial, something that she wasn't ready to share. I should have known. The signs were there, but I was young, and young love is often blind. She had a way of making me feel special, like I was the only one in the room who mattered. She would remember the little details, my favorite songs, my obscure hobbies, the small things I said in passing. I would lie if I said I didn't fall for her quickly. In fact, I fell harder than I ever thought possible. I had never felt more alive. She had this light that made everything brighter when she was around. I felt like the world was opening up to me in ways I hadn't known were possible. But with that light came shadows, and I was too caught up in the brightness to notice them at first. One night, as we sat under the stars in a park near her apartment, she told me something that shook me to my core. "There are things about me you don't know," she said quietly, her voice trembling as if she were confessing something heavy. "I've been running from my past for a long time. You're not the first person to try and get close to me, but I've hurt people. I've made mistakes." I didn't press her for more. Instead, I took her hand and promised her I wouldn't leave, that I would never judge her. I was falling deeper, and her pain felt like something I could fix. I convinced myself that her secrets didn't matter. I didn't matter, as long as I could make her happy. But then one evening I discovered something I never should have. I had been over at her place for dinner. She had prepared something special, candlelight, soft music, the works. But as the night wore on, I noticed she kept her phone on the counter face down. It was unusual for her, as she was always texting or checking her messages. I asked her why, and she just laughed it off, saying she was trying to be present. But then, as she went to the kitchen to grab dessert, her phone buzzed. The name that flashed across the screen made my blood run cold. It was a name I recognized, a name she had mentioned only once, and always with a certain distance in her voice. Ryan. I didn't mean to look, but curiosity and a fear that I didn't want to acknowledge made me pick up the phone. The messages were there, plain as day, sweet, intimate messages that no one in a relationship should ever send to someone who wasn't their partner. I read them, my heart sinking with each word. I saw how they spoke to each other, how they'd met in secret, I saw the promises they had made and the things they planned. I felt sick to my stomach. It was clear as day now, Lily had been lying to me. She had been seeing him while we were together. She had betrayed me. I didn't confront her right away. I couldn't. Instead, I pretended nothing had changed. I went through the motions, helped her clear the dinner plates, listened to her talk about her day, all while my mind was racing. All I wanted to do was run away to get as far from her as possible. But something about her presence still held me in place, even though I knew I should walk away. I wanted to believe in her so badly, but that night as I lay in bed, the weight of her lies pressed on me like 1,000 tons. I couldn't sleep, couldn't stop thinking about how everything had been a lie. I had trusted her with everything I had, and she had betrayed that trust without a second thought. The next day I confronted her. "Lily," I said, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and hurt. "I saw the messages. What is this? What have you done?" Her face went pale, and for the first time, I saw something resembling fear in her eyes. She didn't deny it, though. She didn't even try to defend herself.
Instead, she broke down.
"I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never meant for you to find out. I didn't know how to stop the lies." She tried to explain. She told me that Ryan was from her past, a part of her life she couldn't escape. She told me that she had gotten close to him once, but she had broken away. Or so she thought. But somewhere along the way, things had gotten messy, and she had ended up seeing him behind my back. And yet, as she apologized, I couldn't help but feel this gnawing emptiness. She could apologize all she wanted, but the damage was done. She had chosen him, and now it was too late. I had to let go. I couldn't keep loving someone who didn't love me the way I deserved.
"Why?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper.
"Why did you let me fall for you, knowing you could never give me what I wanted?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't have an answer. She just shook her head like she was as lost as I was. "I don't know," she whispered, barely able to speak through the sobs. "I just wanted to feel something, to feel alive." In that moment, I realized something important. She had never really loved me. She had loved the idea of love, the idea of having someone who cared for her. But in the end, she was just as lost as I was, and no amount of forgiveness could erase the fact that she had betrayed me. I left her that night. The apartment that had once felt like a sanctuary became a place of poison. I didn't look back. In the weeks that followed, I tried to move on. I surrounded myself with friends, started focusing on my work, and slowly began to heal. But I couldn't help but wonder, what was the point of falling in love if it only left me broken? What was the point of trusting someone, only to have them betray me in the end? I learned that love is complicated. It's messy and sometimes it's painful, but it's real. Even if it ends in heartbreak, it's a part of us. And though Lily's secret broke me, it also taught me that not all love is meant to last. Some people come into your life to teach you a lesson, even if it's a hard one. I guess I'm still figuring out what that lesson is. But for now, I know one thing: trust is everything. And without it, love is just a beautiful lie. It was one of those moments you never think will come, but when it does, it completely changes everything. I had known her for a while. Let's call her Emily. She was the kind of person who lit up a room without even trying. With her laughter, her kindness, the way she listened, everything about her was captivating. But I never thought she'd notice me the way I noticed her. I was just another guy in her life, not one she would ever fall for. At least that's what I believed. Then one day I saw something in her eyes that made me wonder. It was subtle, just a flicker when we spoke, but it was enough to make my heart race. I knew Emily well enough to see she was hiding something. And there was something in her smile, an uncertainty, like a part of her was afraid to speak her truth. That's when I realized I think she liked me. But that's where everything got complicated. I don't know if she was aware of it, but I had watched her heart belong to someone else for so long. Nathan, the way she would talk about him, her eyes sparkling with admiration, the way her voice softened when she mentioned his name. It was clear to anyone who paid attention that she was deeply in love with him. I, of course, didn't stand a chance. I tried to push my feelings down. After all, what was I to her? Just a friend. Maybe even just a guy who could provide company when she needed to talk. So I kept my love for her hidden, tucked away where it couldn't hurt either of us. But one evening, everything changed. I had invited her to a quiet dinner at a small cafe. Nothing fancy, just the two of us away from the usual crowd. She agreed easily, and I thought maybe this was just another friendly hangout. But I couldn't shake the thought that tonight felt different. She seemed nervous, her eyes flickering around the room, almost as if she didn't know how to talk to me anymore. Something had shifted. She finally broke the silence. "I need to tell you something, but I'm afraid." "Tell me anything," I said, trying to sound calm, but my heart was beating too loudly for me to be truly at ease. Her hands trembled as she placed them on the table. She avoided my gaze, staring at her coffee as if it could provide the answers. "It's about Nathan." And in that moment, I realized what was happening. "Is everything okay?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Her eyes lifted to meet mine, and for the first time, I saw real vulnerability in her. He's been distant lately, and I don't know how to fix it. I thought I knew what I wanted, but now I'm unsure. I'm feeling things I didn't expect, things I can't ignore." I had to swallow hard. Was she going to say it? Was she going to admit that she felt something for me? I had been waiting for this moment, secretly hoping it would come. And yet, as I watched her struggle with her words, I understood. It wasn't me she was talking about. She was still talking about Nathan. "Emily," I said, my voice soft, "you deserve someone who makes you feel certain, not uncertain." She blinked, and for a moment I thought I saw tears in her eyes. "But what if that someone is you?" she whispered, barely audible. The world stopped for a split second. I felt a rush of emotions, a mixture of joy and guilt. She was saying the words I had longed to hear, but they were wrong. They didn't belong to me. They were meant for Nathan. I wanted to tell her how much I loved her, how much I had always wanted her, but I couldn't, not like this. Not when I knew she was still so deeply entangled in her feelings for him. But I couldn't let her go. What if you just need some space to figure things out?" I suggested, fighting the wave of emotion that surged within me. She nodded slowly. "Maybe, but I don't want to lose you. You've always been here, always understood me. You've been my friend when I needed one the most." I wanted to scream at her to stop pretending like we were just friends, when I had been in love with her for as long as I could remember. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled. The kind of smile that masked everything I was feeling inside. "I'm always here for you, Emily, always." The night ended in a silence neither of us had expected, with her leaving the cafe in a whirlwind of confusion, and me left alone with my broken heart. Days went by, and Emily and I stayed in touch. But there was an unspoken distance now. I could see it in her eyes. She was torn between what she thought she should want and what she was feeling. I was part of that confusion, and I hated myself for it. But then something happened. Nathan came back into the picture. Emily tried to push him away for a while, tried to let the distance between them grow, but eventually she couldn't fight it anymore. She couldn't escape the pull she felt for him. I saw it in the way her voice changed when she spoke about him, the way her eyes lit up when she mentioned his name. She was falling back into his arms, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. And yet I kept hoping. I kept holding on to the idea that maybe, just maybe, she would see that I was the one who could give her the love she needed. But I knew deep down I couldn't ask her to choose between us. She wasn't mine to claim, not really. One afternoon, Emily asked me to meet her. I had no idea what was coming, but I had a sinking feeling in my gut. When I arrived, I saw it in her eyes before she even said a word. I've made a decision," she began, her voice shaky. "I've realized that Nathan is who I want. I'm sorry. I wish I could be the person you need me to be, but I can't betray the feelings I have for him. I just can't." And there it was, the confirmation of what I had feared the most. She was choosing him, the person she was always meant to be with. I nodded slowly, the lump in my throat making it hard to speak. "I understand," I whispered, though every fiber of my being wanted to scream out that I didn't, that I couldn't. She reached for my hand, and for a moment I thought everything would fall apart. But then she spoke again. "You're important to me, though, and I'll always care for you. But I can't betray my own heart." I knew what she meant. She couldn't betray her love for him. And in that moment I realized I had been wrong all along. I couldn't make her feel something she didn't. I had loved her, but love wasn't enough to make someone stay. I smiled, though it was barely a smile at all. "I'll always be here, Emily, always." She kissed me on the cheek, a soft, lingering kiss that spoke of so many unspoken things. But I knew deep down I would have to let her go, because no matter how much I loved her, she wasn't mine to keep. And in that moment I understood. The love she had for him was something I couldn't compete with. It was something I couldn't change. So I stepped back, watching as she returned to Nathan. knowing I had lost her no matter how much it hurt. I still remember the first time I saw her online. It was late one night, and I was scrolling through social media, half-heartedly looking for something interesting to distract me. I wasn't expecting much, just the usual memes and random posts from people I barely knew. But then I saw her. Her profile picture was simple, just her face, soft lighting, and a smile that seemed so genuine. It almost felt like I was already looking at someone I'd known forever. Her name was Emily. I didn't know why, but something about her made me stop scrolling. I clicked on her profile. There was something magnetic about her, something that made me feel like I needed to know more, so I sent her a message. Nothing special, just a casual greeting. I almost didn't expect her to reply. I had messaged so many people before, but most of the time, it felt like I was just sending words into an empty void. But then she replied. We started talking. At first it was small talk, the kind of conversation you have with strangers, but it felt different. It felt effortless, like we were both instantly comfortable with each other. The more we talked, the more I realized how much we had in common. We liked the same movies, had similar tastes in music, even enjoyed the same kind of food. It felt like we were two pieces of the same puzzle, and I couldn't believe how easy it was to talk to her. As the days went by, our conversations deepened. We talked about our dreams, our fears, our pasts. It felt like I could tell her anything. She opened up to me too, and I could tell she trusted me, just as I was beginning to trust her. She was kind, intelligent, and had this incredible way of making me feel seen, like I mattered. I couldn't stop thinking about her. Eventually, I found myself looking forward to our conversations more than anything else. She made me smile even on the darkest days, and every time my phone buzzed with a new message from her, my heart would race. I knew I was falling for her, but I didn't want to rush things. It was still early days, but I couldn't help it. I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe she was my soulmate. I don't know if I was just being hopeful or if it was the connection we shared, but I started to believe that this could be something real, that maybe, just maybe, the universe had aligned to bring us together. I'd spent my whole life thinking love would come in the most unexpected ways, and this felt like the kind of unexpected love that would change everything. One evening we were talking about relationships, and that's when it hit me. She mentioned her boyfriend. I remember the words she typed as if it were yesterday. Yeah, my boyfriend and I are planning a weekend getaway next month. My heart stopped. I didn't know why I felt so crushed by those words, but I did. There it was, right in front of me, the truth. She wasn't single. She was with someone else. My mind raced, trying to process what I had just read. I knew it was silly to feel this way. I didn't even know her in person, but somehow the idea of her with someone else felt unbearable. I didn't want to ask too many questions. I didn't want to sound desperate or needy, but the thought of her being with someone else left a hollow feeling in my chest. I kept talking to her, of course. I wasn't going to stop because being around her, hearing her laugh, reading her words was one of the few things that kept me going. But every time she mentioned her boyfriend, it was like a sharp pang in my heart. It was hard to admit to myself, but I was falling for her in a way I couldn't control. One day I worked up the courage to ask her how long they'd been together. She told me they'd been dating for a couple of years. She talked about him with so much warmth, and I could hear the love in her voice. She was happy, and hearing that, knowing that she was happy with someone else, made my heart ache in ways I never expected. I wanted to be happy for her. I wanted to be the kind of person who was genuinely glad when someone else found happiness, even if it wasn't with me. But I couldn't help the feeling that she was the one who was meant to be in my life. I couldn't shake the thought that maybe we were meant for something more, that maybe fate had brought us together for a reason. I even started imagining a future with her, us meeting in person, going on dates, laughing together, building a life side by side. I knew it was foolish. I knew she had a boyfriend, but my heart didn't care. My heart was convinced we were meant to be together. But as time went on, I started to realize something important. As much as I wanted her to be with me, I couldn't force that. She had her own life, her own choices, and as painful as it was, I had to accept that she was with someone else. She had found her person, just as I was still searching for mine. I tried to put my feelings aside, but it wasn't easy. Every conversation with her was bittersweet, and there were times I found myself withdrawing a bit, trying to protect my heart from feeling too much, but it never worked. My feelings for her only grew stronger even though I knew I couldn't act on them. The last time we spoke, I made a decision. I told her that I'd enjoyed our time talking, that I appreciated the friendship we'd built. I thanked her for being such a bright light in my life, even if she didn't know how much she meant to me. I told her that I wanted the best for her, and that if she was happy with her boyfriend, then that's all that mattered. It was one of the hardest things I've ever had to say, but I knew it was the right thing to do. I didn't want to stand in the way of her happiness, even if it broke my heart to let go. In the end, I don't know what the future holds. Maybe someday we'll meet in person. Maybe we won't. Maybe she'll always be just someone I knew online. Or maybe our paths will cross again in a way I can't predict. But I'll always remember her. The girl I thought was my soulmate, even if she wasn't. It's strange, looking back at how everything unfolded. I think I always knew she would be important to me from the first time we met. But I never could have imagined the way things would turn out. I still don't quite understand it all, but I'm trying to make sense of it piece by piece. It started when we were kids. I was maybe 7 and she was just a year younger, but it felt like we were the same age. We lived in the same neighborhood, went to the same school, and our families knew each other well. I didn't really know much about love back then. Who does when you're that young? But I remember watching her play in the park, laughing with her friends and feeling this pull toward her. It was like she had this light around her that drew me in. I didn't have words for it, but I wanted to be near her, to talk to her, to make her smile. As we grew older, we became inseparable. We did everything together, school projects, bike rides, lazy afternoons at the corner store getting snacks. And there was something about the way she laughed, or the way she'd scrunch up her nose when she was thinking hard about something, that made my heart race. It wasn't just a crush, though. I could feel something deeper in me, like I had always known she was meant to be in my life no matter what. I was never good with words, not in the way you're supposed to be with someone you care about. We were comfortable together, like we understood each other without needing to speak too much. I think that's why I never confessed how I felt. I was scared that if I told her things might change. So I just kept it inside. After all, we were friends, right? It was enough. Years went by and high school came. She grew into a beautiful young woman. People started noticing her, guys mostly. I remember feeling this strange tightening in my chest every time one of them spoke to her or smiled at her. It didn't help that she was kind, always friendly, always polite. And it felt like every time a guy talked to her, she became even more enchanting. It was hard not to feel a twinge of jealousy, but I swallowed it. She was still my best friend, right? That was enough. At least that's what I told myself. But then the change came. One day she introduced me to him. His name was Jason. He was new in town, tall, with that confident smile and the kind of charm that made everyone around him feel special. At first I didn't think much of him. He was just some guy she was talking to. But over time I noticed how much time they spent together. I noticed how her eyes lit up when he was around, how she seemed so comfortable with him in a way she wasn't with anyone else. And then, one day, she told me they were dating. It felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. My best friend, my soulmate in my mind, was falling for someone else. I didn't know how to process it. Part of me wanted to be happy for her, to support her, to be the good friend, but the other part of me was completely heartbroken. I had always thought she'd end up with me. I had always believed that someday, somehow, we'd end up together. But there she was, holding his hand, laughing with him, telling me all about their dates. She looked at him the way I had always hoped she'd look at me, and I couldn't help but feel this deep aching loss in my chest. It wasn't jealousy exactly, not just jealousy, anyway, but more like the realization that I had missed my chance, that someone else had seen what I had always seen in her and now she was his. As the years went on, I stayed in the background, trying my best to be a good friend, but it wasn't easy. Watching them together was torture, even though I would never admit it to her. They made a beautiful couple and everyone could see it. It was clear that she was happy with him, and I wanted her to be happy so badly. But the pain of watching it never really went away. I couldn't stop the feelings I had for her, even though I tried to bury them, tried to let her go. There were times, though, when I'd see moments between us that made me question everything. Like that one night when we stayed up late, talking on the porch like we used to when we were kids. I had a feeling, a fleeting hope that maybe she still felt something for me. But when I looked at her and she talked about Jason, so in love and so sure of it, I knew it wasn't meant to be. I was just the friend, always the friend. I tried to date other girls. It seemed like the right thing to do. I thought it would help me move on, but it didn't. No one could ever compare to her. I couldn't even imagine loving someone else the way I loved her. It was like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. And then years later, things took an unexpected turn. I found out they weren't together anymore. At first, I didn't know what to feel. Relief? Sadness? I didn't know. But she came to me, her eyes red from crying, and told me everything. How things had changed between her and Jason. How she had realized they weren't right for each other. How she felt like she had been holding on to something that wasn't there anymore. I wanted to hold her. I wanted to tell her that I had always been here waiting for her. But I didn't. I just listened because that's all I could do. I was afraid, you see. Afraid that if I said anything too soon, it would be like trying to force something that wasn't meant to be. We spent a lot of time talking after that. Long walks. Quiet evenings, just the two of us. And little by little, I began to see something in her eyes that I had missed all those years. It was like she was finally seeing me in the way I had always hoped. But even then, I didn't want to rush it. I didn't want to ruin what we had. Eventually, after so many years of being there for her, of holding back my feelings, I told her. I told her I had always loved her, even when I didn't say it. I told her that I had always hoped she'd see me the way I saw her. And to my surprise, she didn't pull away. She didn't laugh or get uncomfortable. She looked at me with this tenderness, this understanding, and told me that maybe, just maybe, she had been waiting for me all along. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever is. But it felt like the beginning of something new, something that had been waiting in the wings for so long. And I realized then that maybe, just maybe, love doesn't always happen when you want it to. Maybe it comes when you're ready for it, or when the time is right. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if everything will work out perfectly. But for the first time in a long time, I don't need to know. I just know that after all these years, the girl I've loved since childhood is finally seeing me the way I've always seen her. It all started with a project. Well, not just any project, but one that would bring me and her together. Her name was Emily, a girl who I had seen around campus but never really spoken to. We were both studying engineering, and like many other students, we had our own ambitions and dreams. But the difference with Emily was that she had this spark about her, something that caught my attention every time I saw her. Her passion was infectious, and though I never really thought about her in a romantic way at first, that all changed when we were paired together for a big final year project. I had always thought of myself as someone who preferred to work alone, a bit introverted, but when I walked into that first meeting, there she was, already scribbling notes and thinking about the problem we had to solve. We were tasked with designing a renewable energy system for a small, off-grid community, a project that was supposed to push the boundaries of technology. From the very first moment, Emily's enthusiasm hit me like a wave. She was excited, already deep into the research. I wasn't sure how I felt at first, but there was something about her confidence that made me want to be part of this. The first few weeks were an interesting mix of awkwardness and fascination. I'd try to share my ideas, and she'd quickly jump in with something even better. It was clear that Emily wasn't just a dreamer. She was a doer. She was smart, articulate, and didn't settle for anything less than the best. I had never met anyone who pushed me to be better, to think bigger like she did. Slowly, as we spent more time together, I realized she wasn't just a great partner. She was someone I deeply respected. But it wasn't just her intellect that drew me in. It was the way she looked at the world, like anything was possible if you put in the work, and had the right people by your side. She was determined to make the world a better place, one small project at a time. I was starting to admire her, not just as a partner on the project, but as a person. One night, after a long day of brainstorming and sketching ideas, we decided to take a break. We sat on the rooftop of the campus building, overlooking the city lights. The cool breeze made the evening perfect. We started talking about our personal dreams. It was supposed to be just casual conversation, but something changed in that moment. As we spoke, I realized that we shared the same dreams. We both wanted to create something impactful. We wanted to be part of something bigger than ourselves. I think that was the turning point for me, when I saw her not just as my project partner, but as someone who understood me on a deeper level. The more we worked together, the more I saw our connection growing. Emily and I would often stay up late, refining the design, laughing over small mistakes, or debating over solutions. We shared so many ideas, so many ambitions for what we could achieve in life, beyond just school. It was no longer just about the project. It was about the life we could build together. One night after we solved a particularly tricky issue with our design, she looked at me with that smile, her eyes sparkling. "We can do anything, you know," she said. And for the first time I believed her. As the months went by, our project became more than just a project. It became our shared dream, something we were both committed to bringing to life. And somewhere along the way, we stopped thinking of each other as just teammates. We were something more. It wasn't obvious at first, but there was an undeniable shift in how we started seeing each other. The lines blurred between our professional ambitions and personal feelings. It was during the final stages of the project, just a few weeks before the presentation, that I realized how much she had become a part of my life. We were sitting together in the lab, going over the final adjustments, when she leaned over and whispered, "I'm really glad we did this together." I could see it in her eyes, the same feeling I had. And for the first time, I let myself say it out loud. Me too. I'm really glad we did this together. But there was more to it. It was never just about the project for me. I had fallen for her deeply. I had never told anyone how I felt, partly out of fear, partly because I wasn't sure if she felt the same. But in that moment, it felt right. And as we finally finished the project and presented it, I realized that what we had built together wasn't just a success in terms of the design. It was the foundation of something else, something real. The weeks after the presentation were a whirlwind of emotions. We graduated, but I couldn't stop thinking about her. We stayed in touch, continuing to share our goals, our visions, and eventually our lives. A year later, after a few dates and countless shared dreams, I realized something I had known all along. Emily was the one I wanted to spend my life with. I planned a trip to the same rooftop where we had spent so many hours brainstorming. I had the ring with me, and as we looked out over the city once again, I told her how much she meant to me. I spoke about our journey, about how we started as project partners, and how we had become so much more than that. I told her that our shared dream had turned into something beautiful, and I wanted to continue that journey with her. And with that, I asked her to marry me. She looked at me, her eyes full of tears, and said yes. It felt like the perfect end to the story that we had started together, only it wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. It was just the beginning. Our wedding was everything we had imagined. Simple, yet full of love. It wasn't just a union of two people, but the continuation of a dream that we had been building together for years. We had found a way to turn our shared vision into something real, and now we were starting the rest of our lives together side by side. Looking back on it, I realize how lucky I am. Not just because I found the love of my life, but because I got to build that future with someone who truly understood me, someone who shared my ambitions and my dreams. Emily wasn't just my project partner. She was my soulmate. And together, we were going to change the world. It all started when I was scrolling through social media one night, just mindlessly passing the time. I came across her profile. Her smile immediately caught my attention. She had this energy about her that felt genuine, not like all the perfect filtered images I was used to seeing. I didn't think much of it at first, but something pushed me to send her a message. I remember being nervous, like really nervous. I'd never been good with talking to new people, especially online. But I took the plunge and sent a simple, "Hey, how's your day?" I honestly didn't expect much. But then she replied. Her message was warm, and surprisingly, we clicked right away. We started chatting about small things. Our favorite music, what movies we liked, random stories from our day-to-day lives. It was easy, like we'd known each other for a while. And before I knew it, the messages were flowing. Day after day, we'd talk about everything, from our childhoods to our dreams, our fears, and everything in between. It felt like we were unraveling each other's worlds piece by piece. As the days passed, I started realizing that we had so much in common. But in some ways, we were also completely different. She had a way of seeing the world that balanced my own, where I was a little more cautious. She was adventurous, and where I was more practical, she had this wild, imaginative spirit. It was like we completed each other in a way I never thought possible. At first, I wasn't sure how real this connection could be. After all, we'd only met online. But with every conversation, with every laugh and shared secret, I started to realize how much she meant to me. We both agreed that we needed to meet in person. It felt like we couldn't wait much longer. The anticipation was killing me. When the day came, I was nervous but excited. I remember seeing her for the first time. Her smile was even more beautiful in person. We spent the day together and everything just clicked. It was like we'd known each other forever. I knew in that moment that this wasn't just an online fling. This was something real, something special. From that day on, we didn't look back. Our relationship grew stronger as we continued to talk, laugh, and learn from each other. The more time we spent together, the more I realized how lucky I was to have found someone who truly complimented me. It wasn't just about having fun together or sharing stories. It was about being there for each other, supporting each other and learning how to grow together. Every little thing she did made me fall for her more. One evening, I knew it was time. We'd been through so much together, and I couldn't imagine my life without her in it. I asked her to marry me, and when she said yes, I felt like the happiest person alive. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one I never expected when I first sent that simple message. But now, looking back, it feels like everything was meant to be. It wasn't just chance that brought us together, it was destiny. And that's how we started talking online, getting to know each other, discovering our differences, and finding that we fit perfectly. It wasn't just love, it was our love. And it led us to the best decision of our lives, marriage. I remember the first day I saw her like it was yesterday. Her name was Emily, and she had just started at the office, filling in for a colleague who had gone on maternity leave. At first, she was just another face in the crowd. But there was something about her that caught my attention. She was always so focused, kind, and the way she carried herself made her stand out, even in a room full of people. It didn't take long before we were assigned to work together on a project. I was a little nervous at first, mainly because I wasn't sure how we'd get along. I'd heard she was new to the team, and I had no idea what her work style would be like. But as soon as we started collaborating, I was pleasantly surprised. She was organized, quick to learn, and most of all, incredibly easy to talk to. I'll never forget our first lunch together, just the two of us. It happened almost by accident. We were both grabbing a bite at the same time, and I was debating whether to eat at my desk or go out for a quick break. Without thinking too much about it, I ended up joining her at a small cafe near the office. We talked about the usual things at first, work, how she was settling in, and our commute, but it quickly turned into something else. She asked me what I like to do outside of work, and I told her about my love for photography. I wasn't expecting much of a reaction, but her eyes lit up when I mentioned it. She told me she loved art and photography too, and we ended up chatting about our favorite photographers for hours. We both loved capturing moments in time, seeing the world through a lens, finding beauty in the smallest details. That was the moment when I realized we had so much in common.
Over the weeks that followed, we started to share more of our lives with each other.
We both loved hiking, spending time in nature, and had a shared fondness for old books. She told me about her childhood, how she used to spend her summers reading in her grandmother's garden. It was a small detail, but it stuck with me. I loved how she could make even the simplest things sound so special. We began spending more time together outside of work. Sometimes we'd grab coffee after a long day and sit in the park, talking about everything and nothing at all. I started looking forward to these moments more than anything else. I knew I was falling for her, but I didn't want to rush anything. I wanted to make sure that the connection we had was real, not just a passing work friendship. And as days turned into weeks, I started to realize that this wasn't just about shared interests or common hobbies. There was something deeper between us. One evening, after a long week, we decided to go on a weekend hike together. It was something we had both been talking about for a while, and the weather was perfect. As we walked along the trail, the conversation flowed easily. It was like we didn't need to say much to understand each other. Every now and then, she'd point out something in nature that caught her eye, and I'd snap a picture. She had this way of noticing the little things that others might miss, and I loved that about her. At the summit, as we watched the sunset, she turned to me and said, I think we're a lot alike. We see the world in similar ways." I smiled, not quite knowing how to respond, but the way she said it made my heart race. It felt like something more than just a casual statement. It was like she was acknowledging the bond we had. Later that evening, while we were sitting at a small restaurant, I decided to be honest with her. I told her how much I appreciated our time together and how I had started to feel something more than friendship. To my relief, she smiled and admitted that she felt the same way. That was the moment I knew for sure that this was more than just a fleeting attraction. The next few months were a blur of shared moments, little adventures, and growing closer every day. We would go to photography exhibits, take weekend trips to new cities, and spend quiet nights reading books to each other. There was this effortless connection between us, like we were in perfect sync with one another. I wanted to make things official, but I was hesitant. I didn't want to rush anything, but every time I looked at her, I knew that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with her. So one day, while we were walking through a park near her apartment, I stopped and turned to face her. I told her that I couldn't imagine my life without her in it, and that I wanted to take the next step. I could see the surprise in her eyes, but there was also this warmth, this recognition that we were on the same path. Without saying much, she nodded, and that was all the answer I needed. We didn't need grand gestures or fancy words. We just understood each other. Months passed and we grew even closer. I knew it was time. I had been carrying around the ring for weeks, waiting for the right moment. And finally, on a quiet evening at the same cafe where we'd first talked about photography, I asked her to marry me. She said yes, of course. And I think I saw the same sparkle in her eyes that had drawn me to her from the start. Our wedding was beautiful, simple but perfect. Surrounded by family and friends, we exchanged vows, promising to support each other, to keep exploring, to keep capturing life's moments together. It felt like everything had come full circle, from two people working together in an office to partners for life. Looking back, I realized that it wasn't just the shared interest that brought us together. It was the way we saw the world, how we valued the same things, and how over time, we built something so much more meaningful than either of us had expected. And now every day feels like another adventure, another moment to capture and cherish. I think about that first day we met and how far we've come. It's incredible to think that it all started with something as simple as a conversation over lunch. But here we are together, and I wouldn't change a thing. It's been years, 5 to be exact.
5 long years since I left my hometown.
The place where my roots are buried, to study abroad. The world felt so wide back then, so full of possibilities. And in a way it was, but as I look back now, I realized that the moment I boarded that plane, I also left behind something far more precious than I could understand. I had always told myself I'd return. After all, this is my home. I thought the familiarity of the streets, the sounds of the city, and even the smell of the air would wrap around me like a blanket when I returned, but nothing could have prepared me for how much had changed in the time I was away. When I first got back, the city felt different, almost like a stranger. The old shops I used to visit were gone, replaced by modern cafes and towering buildings. But the biggest shock of all came when I bumped into someone I never thought I'd see again, Maya. Maya. The name alone pulls at my heart like an old forgotten song. We were inseparable once, back when everything was simple and pure. We were kids, innocent and full of dreams. I thought we'd grow up together, that we'd always be a part of each other's lives. But life has a way of drifting people apart. I went to study in another country, and she stayed behind, finishing her studies and working in the city. I remember the last time I saw her before I left. We stood at the train station, both of us pretending we were okay, both of us not wanting to say goodbye. I think we knew that moment would mark the end of our chapter. But now as I walked down the familiar streets of my hometown, I saw her. I was walking near the park, lost in thoughts about how much the city had changed when a voice interrupted me. Long time no see. I turned, and there she was, Maya, in a simple white dress, her hair blowing in the wind, and her eyes, I'm still the same. That warm and inviting shade of brown. The way she smiled, it was like no time had passed. Like we were still those carefree teenagers sharing secrets in the corners of the world. Maya? I asked, not sure if I was dreaming. It's been so long, and yet she looked the same. Yeah, it's me, she said, laughing softly. I didn't expect you to come back after all these years. What brings you home? I must have been staring at her too long because she raised an eyebrow. Are you all right? She asked. I cleared my throat and shook my head. Sorry, I didn't expect to see you, not like this, not after all these years. It's good to see you again. And just like that, we were talking like no time had passed. It felt so easy, so natural. She told me about her life here, how she had stayed in the city, built a career, and how everything had changed for her too. But the more she talked, the more I realized something. She wasn't the same Maya I once knew. She was someone who had lived without me, someone who had created a life in my absence, someone who had her own dreams, her own future. I couldn't help but feel a pang of regret, wondering if I had missed my chance. The way she spoke, the confidence in her voice, it was like she didn't need me. And yet I was still drawn to her, still captivated by the girl who once held my heart. The conversation flowed easily, and we ended up sitting at a small cafe, reminiscing about the old days. We laughed about silly things, like how we'd sneak into the old movie theater, or how we used to argue over who would sit at the front of the classroom. But as we talked, something changed. Something shifted. I remembered the way I used to look at her, the way my heart would race whenever she smiled, the way I thought I'd never love anyone as much as I loved her back then. And sitting across from her now, I realized something. I still loved her. Maybe not in the same innocent, naive way as before, but it was there. The feeling was still alive, buried beneath the layers of time and distance. I couldn't help but wonder if she felt the same. But then again, how could she? She had moved on, built a life without me. And I had been gone, living a life of my own, far away from her. Days passed, and I found myself seeking her out more and more. Every time we talked, every time we shared a moment, I felt like I was falling for her all over again. But this time it was different. It wasn't just the memories of the past that I was falling for. It was the woman she had become. The way she spoke about her work, her passion for what she did, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her dreams. She had become someone amazing, someone who had grown into herself. One evening, as we walked through the city together, I stopped in my tracks. "Maya," I said softly, "I never really got the chance to tell you. Before I left, I never got the chance to say goodbye properly. I was so scared, so unsure of what I was doing, that I just left without looking back. But I've never stopped thinking about you." She stopped walking, and for a moment the city around us felt like it disappeared. It was just me and her standing there, the years between us slipping away. "I know," she said quietly, her voice so calm, so understanding. "I always knew, but I had to let you go, just like you had to let me go." I looked at her, the weight of those words settling in my chest. "I don't want to let you go again," I confessed. Her eyes softened, and she reached out, gently touching my arm. "I don't think we ever really let each other go, not completely. But I need to know if you're here to stay this time." "I am," I said, the words feeling like a promise. "I'm here to stay. I've missed so much, and I don't want to miss any more of this." We stood there for what felt like an eternity, the world moving around us, but feeling like it had slowed down just for us. I realized then that it wasn't just the city I had missed. It was her. It was the feeling of home that she gave me. "I want to start over," I said. "Not like we did before, but in a new way. We've both changed, but maybe, just maybe, we can figure out how to make it work this time." Maya smiled, her eyes sparkling. "I'd like that," she said softly. And with that, we walked forward together into whatever the future held, knowing that this time, we wouldn't let each other go. That's how I would tell it. A story about returning home, rediscovering old love, and finding that sometimes, after all the time that's passed, some things never change. I never expected this to happen. Honestly, it all began so simply, just like any other friendship. She was one of the first people I met when I moved to town. Her name was Emma. I was the new guy at school, awkward and unsure of where I fit in, but Emma, she was different. Confident, with this natural grace about her that made everyone want to be around her. But what caught my attention most wasn't just the way she spoke or how people gravitated toward her. It was the kindness in her eyes. There was something in those eyes that made me feel at ease, like I could be myself without any judgment. We started talking one day after class. I remember she sat next to me in the cafeteria. I was fumbling with my lunch tray, not knowing anyone, feeling a bit lost in this sea of unfamiliar faces. But she smiled at me, and somehow that smile made everything less intimidating. "You new here?" she asked casually. I nodded, my voice getting stuck in my throat. "Yeah, just transferred." "First day, huh?" I laughed nervously. "Yeah, it's a lot to take in." She laughed too, and that simple sound made everything seem less overwhelming. She didn't treat me like an outsider. She treated me like I belonged. She invited me to sit with her and a few other friends. And that small act of kindness changed everything. The days that followed were filled with small talks, shared lunches and walks to class together. At first it was just a friendly routine. I looked forward to seeing her every day, to hearing her stories, to sharing mine. We'd talk about our favorite books, movies, and silly little things we found funny. She made me laugh in a way I didn't know I could laugh. It was comfortable, no pressure, just genuine connection. But as the weeks turned into months, I began to realize something deeper, something that started as admiration for her personality. Her wit, her charm, slowly shifted into something more. It wasn't just her laugh that I found comforting. It was the way she made me feel like I was the only person in the room when she looked at me. The way her touch felt electric even in the simplest moments. I'd catch myself daydreaming about her more and more. The sound of her voice, the way she smiled when she was nervous, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when she was deep in thought. I found myself noticing little details I hadn't before, things that made her uniquely her. I was falling for her and I hadn't even realized it. One afternoon, we were sitting together as usual in the park after school. The sun was beginning to set, casting this soft golden light over everything, making the world feel calm and perfect. I turned to her as she was laughing at something I said, and it hit me in that moment. I love her. It wasn't just admiration anymore. It was a deep, undeniable feeling that filled my chest. My heart raced as I looked at her.
And I found myself wondering if she felt the same way.
But I was scared of ruining our friendship. It was the one thing I didn't want to lose. The thought of telling her how I felt terrified me. What if she didn't feel the same? What if everything changed and we drifted apart? So I kept my feelings to myself, hiding behind the comfort of our friendship. We continued to hang out, laugh and share stories, but the weight of my feelings for her grew heavier with each passing day. It wasn't until one late evening that things began to shift. We had been studying together at my house. It was just the two of us, the soft hum of music in the background. The room felt quieter than usual, almost as if the air was charged with something unspoken. She looked at me then, her eyes a little softer than usual, and asked, "Hey, do you ever think about us more than just friends?" My heart skipped a beat. I froze, unsure of how to answer. I hadn't expected her to say that, but I couldn't lie. I think about it. All the time, I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. Her gaze softened and she smiled, but it was a different smile than before. There was something new in it, something warm and knowing. "I think about it too," she said. My breath caught in my throat. "What does that mean?" "It means I think I've fallen for you. I think I've fallen for you for a long time, but I didn't know how to say it." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was stunned. For the longest time, I thought I was the only one feeling this way, and now here she was confessing the same thing. I couldn't hold it in anymore. "I love you, Emma. I always have. I just didn't know how to tell you." She moved closer to me, her hand finding mine. "I'm glad you told me," she said softly. "I've been waiting for you to say it." In that moment, everything else faded away. There was no fear, no uncertainty, just the two of us, finally admitting what we'd both known for so long. It felt like the beginning of something beautiful, something more than just friendship. We kissed that night, our first kiss, soft and gentle, like the world had stopped turning just for us. From that day forward, we were no longer just friends. We were something more, something deeper. We took our time, allowing our relationship to grow naturally. There was no rush, no pressure. Just the simple joy of being with someone who understood you, someone who loved you for who you truly were. Every day felt like a gift, every moment with her something precious. We didn't stop being ourselves, but we became more than what we were before. We were partners in the truest sense, supporting each other, growing together and loving each other through the ups and downs of life. Looking back now, it feels like our love was always meant to happen. It wasn't sudden or forced. It grew gradually, out of friendship, out of trust, out of all the small moments we shared along the way. What started as a friendship turned into a love I'll cherish for the rest of my life. And I'll never forget how it all began, when we were just two people, sitting together in a park, laughing, talking, and unknowingly falling in love. I don't remember the exact moment I met her. It feels like she's always been there, like the sun rising every morning without fail. We grew up in the same neighborhood, her house just a few blocks away from mine, yet it was as if our paths were always meant to cross. Her name was Emma, and she had the kind of smile, that could light up even the darkest corners of my world. Our childhood was one long, unspoken adventure. We were inseparable, always together. We would play games in the park, making up wild stories about pirates and superheroes. Our laughter echoed through the empty streets, chasing away any worries that dared to sneak in. Emma was fearless, bold, and she had this way of pulling me into her dreams. I was the quieter one, content to let her lead, but I was never bored. When we weren't running around outside, we'd sit in her backyard, our backs pressed against the old oak tree that stood like a guardian between our childhood and the rest of the world. We'd talk for hours about everything and nothing. Sometimes we'd just be silent, letting the sounds of the world fill the air. It was the kind of silence that felt like a conversation, you know? A connection that didn't need words. As we grew older, things started to change. There was this shift, barely noticeable at first. We were still the same Emma and me, laughing in the park, sharing secrets under the oak tree. But something was different. The way she looked at me had changed. Her smile lingered just a little longer, her eyes a little brighter. I couldn't figure it out, but I felt it. Then came that awkward phase, adolescence. Puberty hit like a ton of bricks, and suddenly, the world we knew didn't seem as simple. We both became more aware of the changes happening inside us, physically and emotionally. For the first time, I noticed how pretty she looked. Not just in the way a friend looks pretty, but in a way that made my heart race a little faster. I remember one day we were sitting on the swings, pushing each other gently. The wind was warm and the air smelled like freshly cut grass. I was trying to gather the courage to tell her that something had shifted inside me, that I wasn't the same boy I had been, that every time she smiled it felt like the sun came out. "Hey," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Have you ever thought about things changing between us?" She stopped swinging for a moment, her feet dragging on the ground, and looked at me. Her eyes searched mine, and for a moment there was silence. The kind of silence that stretches out and feels like it might last forever. "I don't know," she said softly. "I think about it sometimes." I wanted to say more, to tell her how I felt, but the words wouldn't come. I was scared of ruining everything we'd built, of changing the dynamic between us, so I said nothing. Instead, we both just sat there, the unspoken tension between us hanging in the air like a storm waiting to break. High school came, and with it, even more changes. We were no longer just kids. We were teenagers discovering who we were, who we wanted to be. But even in the chaos of growing up, Emma and I remained close. We shared our first heartbreaks, our first crushes. But still, there was something between us, an unacknowledged tension. Every time I saw her laugh with another guy, my chest would tighten and I'd pretend it didn't bother me. Every time she looked at me like she was about to say something and then didn't, I felt a pang of longing, a wish that we could be more than what we were. It was during our senior year of high school when everything changed, when the truth came rushing in. We were at a party, one of those end-of-year celebrations before we all went our separate ways. The music was loud, people were laughing and dancing, but Emma and I stood on the porch, away from the chaos just like we always had. "I'm leaving soon," she said, her voice quiet. I nodded, but my heart sank. I'd always known we'd grow up and move on. We talked about college, about our futures, but it felt different now. The reality of it, the fact that we might not see each other every day, hit me like a punch to the gut. "I don't want things to change," I admitted, my voice thick with emotion. "I can't imagine not having you around." She turned to look at me, her face serious for the first time in ages. "I don't want that either, but we both know we can't stay here forever." I wanted to argue, to tell her that maybe we could make it work. Maybe we could figure out how to keep this feeling we had for each other, but I couldn't bring myself to say the words. Instead, I just stood there helplessly as the world spun around us. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, replaying every moment with Emma in my mind. I realized that all this time, I had been living in a bubble where Emma and I would always be together, where things would always be simple. But now I knew that life wasn't like that. The next day, I found her sitting by the oak tree, the one we'd spent so many afternoons under. I sat down next to her, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a weight settle on my chest, heavy and impossible to ignore. "I love you," I said, and I wasn't sure how it came out, but it did. It was the truth, the one truth I'd been running from all these years. She didn't say anything at first. She just looked at me, her eyes soft, her lips trembling like she was about to cry. Then she reached out, taking my hand in hers. "I love you too," she whispered. And that was it. In that moment, we both realized that all those years of growing up together, of being just friends, had been leading to this. It wasn't just about being with each other. It was about needing each other. We couldn't live without each other, not anymore. We didn't have all the answers. We didn't know what the future would hold. But we knew this: we were meant to be together. After everything we'd been through, childhood, adolescence, heartaches, and unspoken feelings, we had found something stronger than friendship. We had found love.